Certainly echo everything that has been said about the incredible privilege of serving with these guys. I want to jump down to a verse that God has used in my life. He actually gave me this verse the very first year of our ministry here at Fellowship. And to put that in a historic context, this month, January, is actually 40 years since we started this church in a basement, finished basement in Marlton, New Jersey. And so 40 years ago, God laid this verse on my heart. 1 Timothy 4:16, keep a close watch on yourself and on the teaching. Persist in this, for by so doing you will save both yourself and your hearers. This particular verse, God really challenged me with two simple things. He says, keep a close watch on two things. The first one is yourself. The word keep watch on or keep close watch, we would also translate pay attention to, focus on, make it a priority, which is a little bit strange. It sounds pretty self-absorbed and narcissistic to make your priority yourself. We all say, well, these are my priorities, God, family, church, work, however you define the next few. But I learned early on that the greatest impediment to my being able to fulfill any of the rest of that verse was going to be making a priority of myself. That my own life was going to be a lifelong battle, struggling between what's called the flesh, the sinful nature, and the Spirit, God's Spirit in my life. And I saw an incredible difference there. I saw an angry young man. I saw a self-centered young man. I saw a self-ambitious young man when my flesh was in control. I saw a different quality of life. And I saw that when I prioritized Christ being in control of my life, when I paid attention to myself, very different people came out of my life, one or the other, the flesh or the spirit. That angry, driven, self-centered man can still be seen, is still seen, because my flesh, my sinful nature is still very much around. And so, still, having to keep a watch on myself these 4 decades in. Giving attention to myself, I found, was really essential because the thing that drove me, and can still drive me, is the sense of wanting to be sufficient, of not being enough, of needing to be more. And the only antidote that I have found to that loud voice in my head that causes me to be an angry person, an ambitious person, a driven person, which is driven by, I've got to be more, is 2 realities that God has impressed on my heart over and over. The first reality is one I didn't want to learn. I've said this before. It is the fact that I am more corrupt, self-centered, and evil than I ever dared believe. But that is answered by God. But this second reality, I am more cherished, valued, and accepted by God than I ever dared hope. As I have learned more of that first, I have come to be stunned with the reality of the second. And for me, giving attention to me is to let God love me and change me. It is to remind myself over and over through His Word, God's for me, He accepts me, He enjoys me, He likes me. And I found that my greatest prayer, that I pray far more than any other prayer for the people that I love in my life, is this: Lord, help them to know how much You love them. It is the liberating reality of my life. Paying attention to me is allowing God to stun me with his love. And the second reality that God has given to me, the second challenge in this, and I'll be quicker with this one, is to watch your teaching. I enjoy leading. I really enjoy directing things. God made me that way. But my greatest calling, I believe, has been to preach. I believe deeply in the gift of leadership, and I've tried to grow as a leader. But there have often been times in my ministry and my life where God has convicted me, you're reading too much about leading, you're paying too much about it. I have never been convicted when I have been drawn to grow as a preacher, to read more widely, to study more deeply. And I believe God has constantly reminded me that where, at least with my life, the little bit of influence that I'm supposed to make in God's purposes in my life, through my life, come by keeping a watch on myself and on my teaching. I'm trying to be a preacher. I'll close with this. You may be out there and you may say, well, if you've devoted all that energy to preaching, why aren't you better at it? And I just want to say, my response would be this. Up in northern Michigan, there's a guy there. He's a Christian, but he's a cantankerous old guy, and he's not good with people. And one time we were up there, and Marion was telling the story about how someone had asked, how can this guy be a Christian? To which Marion's aunt, who had a lovely woman, been a missionary in Africa for years, and she just made this statement: well, imagine what he'd be like if he wasn't a Christian. And I guess my response would be, in regard to my preaching, imagine if I hadn't given attention to it, what it would be like. This verse has guided me. Give attention to yourself. Give attention to your teaching. And our purpose in this morning in doing this partly is just to get the pastors up there, remind you who they are for those who don't know, but it also largely was just hopefully to have you hear verses maybe that God will prompt you with as you think, what are the life verses that God has used in your life? Because he does speak to us along the way, right? All right.